going to be talking about Net Amazon EC2 module and a little bit about EC2 as well. Let's see. What is EC2? EC2 is Amazon's elastic computing cloud technology. Emerson talked a little bit about it yesterday. Basically, it's a way for you to dynamically expand and contract your network as needed when you need to, basically when you need a boost in capacity and you don't want to pay to have a whole lot of servers hosted somewhere. It's currently in beta status, closed beta status, but if you sign up, they periodically let more people in. I recommend doing that because the queue is pretty short, at least from what I've heard of people signing up for it. And you only pay for what you use, which is extremely attractive. Oh, sorry. Some of the basic features of EC2 are that you can create custom Linux-based images and launch multiple images of a machine from a single call. You're able to more tightly control the permissions as well as control firewall rules to the security groups of machines. Well, and I'll explain more about what that exactly means in a minute. What is S3? S3 is another product from Amazon. It's Amazon's simple storage service. You serve assets from Amazon's CDN-like network called S3. Again, you only pay for what you store or transfer. Anybody can sign up for this, so I recommend doing so. I don't work for Amazon either. Some of the basic features of S3 are content is placed in buckets. And it's in content, each piece of content is really, they call it an object, but it's really just an asset, such as an image or an FLV or whatever you want to serve. It serves the content very quickly. Again, it's not really a CDN, but I'm kind of having a hard time describing what exactly it is. It has CDN-like properties. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what a CDN is. Anybody? Content delivery network. Basically like Akamai. How many are you familiar with Akamai? It's similar to Akamai, except that as far as I know, and Emerson can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not really distributed, the servers. It's pretty much like one or two data centers. Or is it like globally distributed?
So
S3 that is.
The official stance is it's a globally distributed thing. Obviously, Akamai has more distribution points throughout the world, and they make a larger point of the mean network latency to any given point of distribution. We don't care so much about that.
So you can also use it as a virtual file system using Fuse-based mounting. How many people are familiar with what Fuse is? It's basically a file system that you can mount in user space instead of kernel space. And what you can do is there's a few types of ones. There's one that I find particularly handy that's called SSH Fuse, or SSHFS rather. It basically lets you mount a file system over SSH, and it's pretty handy. But I'll get into more about that in a minute. Practically speaking, unlimited disk, obviously not realistically, but essentially for what most everybody here is going to be using for, it's unlimited. And how do EC2 and S3 work together? EC2 stores all the machine images, which I'll describe in a minute. It stores it all on S3. As well as right now with EC2, there's no real persistent storage, which is obviously a big problem for companies who want to put stuff out there. They don't want to have it disappear should an instance crash or be terminated. So what people are doing is they're looking at various ways to do persistent storage, and one of them is to use S3 as a persistent storage device, using such drivers as S3DFS, also known as Infinidisc, which apparently it recently changed its product. And as far as I know, the bandwidth transfer costs between EC2 and S3 are free, whereas normally when serving from EC2 or S3, it does cost money. It's pretty minimal, which is the attractiveness of these products. What is Net Amazon EC2? It's an interface in Perl to Amazon's EC2. It uses the query API, the query version of the API, which is really just the REST interface to their to their API. There is a SOAP version. However, Perl's SOAP capabilities were not really up to snuff in signing SOAP messages and doing message-based authentication. So the query version is much easier to use, honestly. As of the version I released last week, it supports the latest version released from Amazon, which included the ability to do NAT on the EC2 image, EC2 instances. Some of the motivations, most of the code that I want to interact with EC2 is based in Perl, and APIs exist for pretty much every other major language except Perl, and I just couldn't let that be. Some of the things people are using that I work with, as well as myself and other people that come up to me and tell me what they're doing. Using it to monitor the status of a cloud, to determine which instances are up, how many you've got up. Using that to then connect to them, determine load. You can also use it as a gatekeeper if you need to expand. If you need to expand and contract capacity. Also, since you can do a lot of management of permissions and network security, some people have put together a web interface to add a bunch of rules and general cloud management interface to terminate instances, start new instances, and I'll describe more about that in a minute. All right, I'm going to go over what methods are available to work with EC2. Right now, this currently implements all the currently provided API methods to access EC2. So let me go over the first one, which is probably the most basic one. It's to register an image. Now, the way EC2 works is, for most people, you'll start up Amazon provides a list of kind of default images, which have like Fedora Core 6, or not Fedora Core 6, but Fedora Core 4, various flavors of Linux. And you take that and you install what you want on there. So if you want to have Apache on there, if you want to have MySQL on there. And then after you've done all the customization that you want, you can then basically save an image of it. And you save an image of that, and then you upload that image to S3. And then once it's available in S3, you can register that image so it becomes available to instantiate when you want to start an EC2 instance of that image that you just customized. And you would use this method to register the image that you just uploaded. Describe images. This is pretty handy. I mean, this will show you what images are available to instantiate. There is a good number of images provided by Amazon, as well as people can make their images publicly available should they have a particular piece of software that they want to bundle in an actual machine image, as well as your own machine images that you want to be able to instantiate. But this will get you a data structure containing all the available images that you can instantiate, and you can pass in various flags which can narrow down whether or not you want to see just Amazon's or just yours, or all executable images. Deregister image. This is what happens when you basically want to get rid of an image that you've already uploaded. Now, this won't delete it off of S3. You'll have to do that on your own. But it will deregister the image and make it so it can no longer be instantiated. Run instances. This is probably the core of what what EC2 is really about. This will start an instance of an image that you've customized, and there's like a million different things that you can pass into this as far as how many you want to start, the min and max number of servers you wish to start, the actual image you want to start, instances of, security groups, which I'll explain in a minute, that it can belong to, as well as a key pair to use. And you can also pass in user data, which if people want to, they can ask me about that later. Has some handy uses, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's part of the core. Describe instances. For most of what you're going to be doing, if you use this module, this is probably the most handy thing. This will give you a list of all the currently running instances that you've got instantiated on your account, as well as recently running instances. And the reason why I say recently running as well is because after you terminate an instance, it still appears in this list for about an hour, give or take. But this pulls back the information such as the IP address and the host name that the instance was started at, the key the security group belongs to. And this is commonly used to be able to actually write the code that would go out and interact with the hosts once they're started. Terminate instances. Now, as Emerson described yesterday, when an instance crashes, all the data on it is gone. The same goes for when it's terminated. So you'll want to be careful in using this, but this does exactly what you would expect it to do. You can pass in an instance ID or a array ref of instance IDs, and it will terminate them. When you're starting up an instance, you need to have a key pair that associates with it so that you can actually access the machine. You probably won't use this method too often, but you definitely need to use it at least once. What it returns is like key information, and key material, and key fingerprint, and then you use the key to SSH into the instantiated instance, and when you start up an instance, the key pair that I mentioned, that you pass what comes back from this into that. Describe key pairs. Probably won't use this too often, but this just gets a list of the current key pairs associated with your particular EC2 account. Delete key pair. Probably want to be careful with this one because technically you can delete a key pair, I believe, from an instance that's currently running with it, so you'll have no way of accessing your box if you do so. So again, probably want to be careful with this. Describe image attribute. Image attributes, currently there's only one image attribute available, and that's who can launch it. I think once it goes out of beta or in coming months, I'm sure they'll add more ability to do things with images. But right now this just describes whether or not it's launchable. It's got a global launch permission, meaning other people can launch it or not. Again, modify image attribute, this talks about the image attribute that I just mentioned. Right now, the only one you can modify is launch permissions. Be careful doing that, though, because if you do that, other people are going to be able to launch your instance. So if you have any secure data on there, I wouldn't put it there. But certainly, people do make publicly launchable instances if they find, someone wants to upgrade to Fedora Core 6 and make that available. So people do that fairly frequently, actually. Reset image attribute does pretty much what you would expect it to. Create security group. Now, all the kind of security and access control to the EC2 instances is handled through security groups. And this just basically creates a security group that you can start with. You can't really pass any additional options and other than the name of the group. You modify it with the next method, or the one after that. Describe security groups. This will bring back quite a bit of information. This brings back all the security groups and all the network permissions associated with them, such as source IP, destination IP permissions for that, blocks, ports, protocols. Brings back all that kind of information. So you would use this if you were going to write like a web interface or just any general interface to be able to control the firewall for your EC2 instances. Delete security group. You also want to probably be careful with this one because I think you can delete a security group of a currently running instance, which would probably make it so that you couldn't access it, but I'm not 100% sure. I think it's still undefined whether or not that'll happen, but I don't recommend deleting a security group of a currently running instance. But again, this just will wipe out a security group as expected. Authorize security group ingress. This one is a really long name, but this is what you do when you want to add network permissions, such as you want to open up port 80, you want to open up SMTP. You would use this. You could define blocks of IPs, specific protocols. It's actually very, very fine-grained in the ability to control your network. Revoke security group ingress. This does basically what you would expect it to do. Just revokes what was previously granted in the previous step. Get console output, an extremely handy function. This was recently added back in February, I think, beginning of February. And what would happen previously is, especially I had a lot of personal hardship with this one where I would try to upgrade an instance or excuse me, I tried to upgrade an image. It's like Fedora Core 6, for example. It worked fine. I'd like go to reboot it, and it wouldn't come up, and you had no way of like accessing it. SSH wouldn't start. You really want the console output. Now you can access it by specifying it currently running instance, so you don't have an instance that's running that you have no way of accessing. Well, I mean, it'll still not be running, but at least you can see what was on the console, and it'll just return a scalar with the text of the what's on the virtual console. Reboot instances. This is a way to reboot a good number of instances if you don't want to actually log in and reboot them remotely, or if they're unable to be accessed. So this is also recently added. It's pretty handy. Now, one thing to note about rebooting is it's still on the clock when it comes back up, whereas with terminate, it becomes, the instance is terminated and it's no longer going to be kind of billing. But with reboot instances, it will just reboot it. You should still have the data available if you do a reboot. So if you've got data on there, it should persist past the reboot. It just doesn't persist past terminate or a crash. And now for a very, very simple example. The third line is just creating an EC2 object in Perl. You pass it you get an access key when you sign up for EC2, and you get a secret access key. You just pass those in. And the next line will start an instance of an imaginary instance ID, or excuse me, an imaginary image ID, and you have to specify min count and max count. Right now, I'm just want to start one of them. You can also, like I mentioned, you can pass in things like security group it can belong to, a specific key to start it with, as well as like you can pass in user data and some other stuff. It's all documented in the pod pretty thoroughly. The next line will pull out the instance ID, which is you'll get that returned to you once you've actually started the instance. Now, it takes probably between 1 to 5 minutes to start up an instance in general, but it will be, it will return instantly. It's just that it won't be available to be logged into till about then. But most of the operations with an instance, such as describing an instance, terminating it, getting the console output, will work based off the instance ID which comes back. And here, in the next step, I just grabbed a list of the currently running instances. You can narrow it down to specific instance IDs to find out what their current status is, and then it returns a data structure that you can then go through and pull out the information you're looking for.
I forgot to give you your 5-minute warning. You've got like 3 minutes left.
Okay, that's cool. And terminate instance, and you wouldn't want to run this example as is, even though it does run, but what it does is it'll terminate the instance before it's actually had a chance to finish starting, but it's kind of in there as an illustrative example of should you want to terminate an instance, this is what you would do. Upcoming features. Currently, testing is difficult, for automated testing at least, because first, for example, to register an image, you have to actually take an image. You have to create a bundle out of it. You have to upload the bundle to S3, things which are not really easily done automated yet. And the second reason is tests are not free. They actually cost money. Starting up an instance, be it 15 cents or 10 yen or so, it's not. It's not expensive, but you don't want people to be incurring costs without there being a warning of some sort. But definitely need to get, obviously I've tested it quite heavily, but it would be nice for people to be able to run more automated tests than there currently are. Right now, the module is OO. However, the data that comes back is in a data structure format instead of a object with accessors. That would be very much something that's going to be probably the first thing added. But right now, it currently works, and I need to make sure I do not break it for people who have stuff already in production. Next up is convenience methods. I find myself doing a lot of the same things over and over again with the module. I figure other people are probably going to be doing the same. And the last is to continue supporting new EC2 APIs as they get released. They seem to be releasing an API about every month or two, adding new functionality to it. And as soon as that happens, obviously, I update the code. Lastly, here's a list of resources about EC2. The S3 DFS that I mentioned earlier, which is the persistent storage across S3 for EC2. The fourth link is a kind of ugly long link, but it's a link to Amazon's S3 page. And the last is just a link to the slides. That's it. Any questions?
いやいや、押してますけど、まあ、質問1個ぐらいなら。Have time for maybe one question, two questions? Any questions? Comments?
Anyone actually using EC2? Anyone
I
else?
don't count there. I work there.
How about S3? Anyone?
If anybody's having problems with EC2, you can also just talk to me. Like, I'd like to use it, that kind of problem.
I have a problem. I just don't have enough time.
I could give you a time machine, perhaps. Lightning talks are starting from 4:30, I believe. So people that want to see lightning talks should be there by 4:30. We've got time for some more questions. Big round of applause for Jeff.